Hello and welcome to Evaluation Headlines, our new series where we speak with heads of independent evaluations to understand how they're adapting their evaluations to remain relevant in the times of the COVID-19 crisis. Most evaluators would agree with me when I say that the biggest challenge that the COVID-19 situation has thrown their way is the inability to travel, to collect data, to have stakeholder engagement. Among other things, today we will be discussing what are the ways that these departments are finding around this very big challenge. I'm very pleased to have with me today on the show Fabrizio Felloni. He is the Deputy Director of Independent Evaluation at IFAD, and Juha Uitto. He is the Director of Independent Office of Evaluation at GEF. Fabrizio, I'm going to come to you first. Unprecedented demand from client countries for both financial and technical support. Very tempting to forget to look at the long term. Do you think that is where the role of evaluators come in? To have their gaze firmly fixed on the long term?
Certainly, because evaluation still is important during the time of crisis. One could even argue it's even more important. During a period of crisis, and COVID-19 is no exception, program managers are typically concerned with keeping program activities on track. So disbursing physical activities following the scheduled calendar. But of course, there is a risk that this focus on the short term and reacting to the crisis may detract attention from pursuing the ultimate long-term goals of a program. So that's why evaluation can provide strategic guidance and why it is so important during the time of crisis.
Right. Juha, if I may come to you next, obviously GEF has a very different mandate, but in terms of evaluation, what are the current issues that you're facing?
I think Fabrizio has outlined the general situation very well. But what I'd like to emphasize is that it's indeed very important for us to keep the big picture in mind. So this pandemic, at the face of it, is a health crisis with very severe economic and social impacts. But fundamentally, it's an environmental crisis because the virus that causes COVID-19 is a zoonotic one, meaning that it comes from animals. And the reason why these types of pandemics are increasing in frequency is that there are increased encounters between humans and animals. And this is all exacerbated by the fact, by the ways we exploit and abuse the natural environment. As evaluators, we can't focus only on the short term, but we have to think about the longer term ways in how the human and natural systems interact and interplay with each other. At the IEO, for example, we have been recently taking a look at how the GEF has in the past responded to epidemics such as SARS and Ebola. And now we are looking also at how current projects are adjusting and adapting to the current crisis.
Fabrizio, I'm going to ask you, what is your Office of Independent Evaluation doing to remain relevant to your operations during this time of crisis?
We have to be aware that in a crisis like this, there is no absolute and perfect substitute to a traditional evaluation approach. And a traditional evaluation approach would typically include data collection, visits to the project sites, and interactions in person with the stakeholders. Of course, there are ways in which we can collect meaningful information. One of them, and particularly this is important in the case of IFAD, because many of our projects, actually all our projects, work at the community, at the village level. So one way to deal with this is to have national consultant visit project site if the local health and security conditions allow this to happen. So this would allow them to provide a ground truthing of information that is available elsewhere, discuss, interact with the end users, beneficiaries, other stakeholders, take photos or even videos, and this will be a source of evidence to triangulate with other sources. Another way, of course, is that of having virtual interviews with main stakeholders via phone, Skype, or Zoom. Again, this will allow us to receive their feedback and perspectives. Unfortunately, the way in which people interact changes depending on the medium of interaction. So when they are not really aware or sure about who is following the conversation, the responses might not be the same. Data can also be available from remote sensing, for example, satellite data, satellite images, and this would allow us to compare before and after just based on the photos that exist of a project site. This can be useful when we have a project that deals, for example, with the infrastructure or natural resource management. So we'll be able to compare situation with and without project and before after project. Of course, what this data does not show us, will not show us is who have access to resources, who has access to infrastructure, who is having access to natural resources, and how the benefits are distributed. This will not be available to us. This type of information will not be available to us only based on images. Last but not least, we can also conduct mini surveys or even sometimes large surveys via phone, via internet or through other media. Again, there's a problem here of digital divide. So some people, particularly the poorest or those who live in remote areas, might be excluded from access to this media. Again, with a problem of representativeness of the sample that we interviewed. Having said this, of many limitations, but still with this caveat, I think these approaches can allow us to provide meaningful assessment of a project and also provide meaningful learning to those who need to manage the project or design projects in the future.
Juha, I'm going to ask you a similar question. What is your Office of Independent Evaluations doing to remain relevant in these times of crisis?
Well, at the GEF, we've found similar solutions and we're using mixed methods. So for example, indeed, these geospatial methods and approaches, they are very well suited to environmental work. Because they allow us to look into trends in things like forest cover, land use, land cover, water resources, vegetation productivity, and so forth. And also, they allow us to create time series, even in situations where projects didn't collect baseline data or where there is no baseline data available, because these satellite images, for example, they are available for at least the past 2 decades at very low cost or no cost, actually. I said mixed methods. So we've been combining the satellite and remote sensing type of analysis with data from other sources and other organizations also, not only our own data. So for example, in a recent evaluation, we used World Bank's household survey data, which was also geocoded. So it was really nice because we could then combine it with our own analysis of the GEF's sustainable forest projects and combine it with and then analyze the environmental trends. So I think my key message there would be probably the fact that you take the data where you can find it.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio and Juha, for joining us today on the show.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. Thank you, Saleha.
Thank you for this interaction, and it is a pleasure to be a part of this very interesting initiative. Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us online. We'll be back again next week with another topic, another set of panelists. Till then, stay safe.